The bridge was silent. The hum of the engines, a constant murmur beneath their feet, had become a comforting background noise, a reminder that, at least for the moment, the ship was alive. But Captain Mirasato couldn't ignore the tension hanging in the air, thick and unyielding. Her fingers tightened around the armrest of her captain's chair as she stared out into the void beyond. On the viewscreen, the enemy fleet glistened like a sea of stars, a fleet of impossibly large ships, their black hulls sleek and menacing. They had arrived. The Valorx Empire. A race of aliens that had once thought the human race nothing more than a nuisance. But now they were here, preparing for war. And they believed they had already won. Myra's jaw clenched. She had heard the reports, seen the simulations. They thought humanity would crumble, unable to stand against their warships. They thought the old ships, the ones that carried the scars of countless battles, would be no match for the Valorx's terrifying might. But they hadn't counted on this, the Ghost Star. Her ship. Captain! Lieutenant Marlowe's voice sliced through the silence, breaking her concentration. The Valorx flagship is signaling. They demand immediate surrender. Mira glanced over her shoulder at the young officer. Marlowe, only a few years into her career, had the kind of unshakable confidence that only youth could afford. But she, like every member of this crew, didn't truly understand what they were up against. None of them did. Mira didn't answer right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, her mind racing. She had studied the Valorx's tactics, their technology, their brutal efficiency in war. She knew their strategy would be to overwhelm them with sheer force, to force humanity into submission before they even had a chance to fight back. But Mira wasn't just any captain. And this wasn't just any ship. We won't surrender, she said, her voice firm. She turned back to the view screen, meeting Marlowe's uncertain gaze. Tell them we're prepared to fight. No terms. No negotiations. Marlowe hesitated, glancing down at her console before nodding. She relayed the message. Myra's mind wandered to the crew of the Ghost Star. Their lives were about to change forever. If they failed, humanity would be lost. The entire fleet of the Valorx Empire was ready to tear through the remnants of Earth's colonies, and it would all begin here, with this battle. She couldn't afford to fail. Not now. Not after everything. Mira took a deep breath and turned back to the display. The Ghost Star was her ship, and she knew it inside and out, every system, every weapon, every crew member. But the most important thing wasn't the firepower. It was the heart of the ship, buried deep within her core. Deploy the drones, Mira ordered. Deploying now, Captain, came the reply from Ensign Jalen, the ship's weapons officer. She could hear the click of buttons, the whir of systems coming to life. The ship hummed with purpose. Myra's mind flashed back to the beginning, the moment she had taken command of the Ghost Star. It had been a ship like any other, an old warship repurposed for the new era. But something about it had called to her. Its systems were old, but well-maintained, and hidden within its hull was technology beyond anything the Valorx had ever seen. But they didn't know that. No one did. The drones, the Ghost Star's pride, would be humanity's first line of defense. They were not just tools of war. They were designed to be an extension of the crew's will, their emotions, their determination. It was this connection that made them different from anything the Valorx had ever faced. Mira felt the pulse of the ship through her fingertips, as though it were a part of her. The connection was real. The drones were ready. Outside the ship, the enemy fleet grew larger, and the tension in Myra's chest tightened. Her heart pounded as she adjusted the strategy. This was it. No turning back. The screens flared to life with a series of incoming messages from the Valorx flagship. The Valorx, it seemed, were growing impatient. Their threat was clear: submit now, or face destruction. Mira smiled. A tight, grim smile. They thought they had control. They thought humanity was weak, that the remnants of Earth's fleet were nothing more than a scattered group of survivors waiting to be wiped out. They were wrong. They think we'll fold, she muttered to herself. But they have no idea what they're up against. Captain? Marlowe's voice pulled her from her thoughts. Mira looked at the young officer again, catching the nervous glint in her eyes. It wasn't fear, no, not exactly. But it was the kind of uncertainty that only a few moments before the battle could bring. "We won't fold," Mira said again, more loudly this time. "We're going to make them fight for every inch of this space." The first volley of enemy fire came fast, bright streaks of crimson energy tearing toward them. Myra's heart raced as she watched the explosions bloom on the screens. The drones shot forward, weaving through the fire, their own weapons lighting up in the darkness. But something was wrong. The enemy's fleet wasn't retreating. They weren't even hesitating. They were coming in for the kill. Mira stood straighter in her seat, gripping the armrest as the ship shook. She glanced at Marlowe, who was still looking at the screen with wide eyes, but Mira knew in the pit of her stomach, that this wasn't the fight she had imagined. The Valorks were underestimating them, yes, but they weren't stupid. They had their own weapons, their own deadly strategies. And they were not going to go down without a fight. "All hands brace for impact," Mira said, her voice now steady, cold. "This is it." The Ghost Star surged forward, her engines roaring to life as they slammed into the battle. The drones followed in formation, ready for the oncoming storm. Myra's grip tightened once again. The battle had begun. The spark had been lit. And nothing would ever be the same. The Ghost Star was shaking. Mira gripped the armrest of her chair as the ship bucked beneath her, the sound of metal groaning and engines whining filling the bridge. She could feel the weight of every single decision she'd made in the last few hours, the lives of the crew, and the future of humanity hanging in the balance. "Captain?" Marlowe's voice cracked through the chaos. "Shields are holding, but the enemy's weapons are cutting deeper. We're losing momentum." Myra's jaw clenched as she looked out at the endless expanse of stars on the view screen. The Valor's fleet was closing in. They were faster, stronger, and more organized than anything humanity had ever faced. The battle had only just begun, but the damage was already more than they had expected. The drones, once so agile and precise, were beginning to show signs of straying. A few had already been destroyed, their once gleaming frames reduced to floating debris. The crew, too, was struggling to maintain control as the Ghost Star weaved through the barrage of enemy fire, the ship's weapons systems flickering on and off with each impact. "We need to pull back, Captain." Lieutenant Jalen's voice was urgent, almost pleading. "We can't keep up with their firepower. If we keep taking hits like this—" Mira cut him off with a sharp glance, her eyes hard as steel. "No. We're not retreating. We're here to fight." Marlowe swallowed hard but nodded, silently acknowledging the order. The truth was, Mira knew they were outmatched. No one had expected the Valorks to be this aggressive, this relentless. But that didn't matter now. The Ghost Star was her ship, and it had been designed for moments like this. Her fingers danced over the controls, bringing up a set of tactical readouts. The drones were still in play, but they needed more time to adapt to the Valorks' counterattacks. The Valorks had the advantage, but that didn't mean humanity had already lost. "Not yet. We can do this," Mira muttered under her breath, though she wasn't sure if she was convincing anyone else, or herself. "Captain, the Valorks are pushing forward." Marlowe's voice trembled. "They're using their disruptor beams on our rear thrusters. We're not going anywhere fast." Mira looked at the screen again. The Ghost Star was limping, its engines struggling to push against the overwhelming force of the Valor's assault. A dozen new drones had been launched from the enemy's ships, all targeting the Ghost Star's weak points. It was only a matter of time before they were completely overwhelmed. "Not if I can help it." Her mind raced through the calculations, pulling up the one last option, the one weapon they still had buried deep within the ship's core. She hadn't wanted to use it so soon, but the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. "Ensign Jalen, ready the pulse cannon." "No," she commanded. Jalen froze for a moment. The pulse cannon wasn't like any weapon they'd used before. It was a last-resort weapon, capable of devastating anything within a massive radius, but also dangerous to anyone in close proximity. They had never tested it in full-scale combat, and activating it now could result in the ship taking permanent damage. Captain, Jalen began, his voice uncertain. I know the risks, Mira interrupted. We're out of time. Do it. For a moment, everything on the bridge went quiet. The hum of the engines and the distant sounds of gunfire were drowned out by the tense silence that filled the room. Mira locked eyes with Jalen, who nodded reluctantly before flipping a switch on his console. Pulse cannon charging, Jalen announced. Ready on your mark. Mira took a deep breath. The moment was here. The Ghost Star's engine sputtered one last time as the pulse cannon powered up, its energy siphoning from every part of the ship. Mira felt the surge of power beneath her feet, the weight of their final chance pressing down on her. She spoke the words softly, but with resolve. Fire! The pulse cannon erupted with a deafening roar, its energy wave expanding outward like a shockwave, cutting through the blackness of space. Myra's chest constricted as she watched the energy pulse streak across the screen, a blinding arc of light. In the blink of an eye, the leading Valor's ship disintegrated, torn apart by the sheer force of the blast. For a moment, Mira dared to breathe. But the silence didn't last. The Valor's flagship had been hit, but the rest of the fleet wasn't retreating. They were adapting, faster than she could have predicted. Another volley of fire came streaking toward them, faster and more accurate than before. The Ghost Star's shields flickered once, then shattered under the pressure. Shields down! Marlowe shouted. We're exposed! Mira didn't hesitate. She slammed her palm down on the emergency override and turned the ship hard to port, sending the Ghost Star into a sharp evasive maneuver. The ship groaned under the sudden change in direction, but Myra's focus never wavered. Keep the drones engaged! Protect the rear! Mira barked as the ship jerked and twisted in space. The enemy was relentless. Every maneuver they made only seemed to intensify the Valor's assault. Myra's stomach churned as she saw several of the drones go dark on her tactical display, one after another, blinking out of existence. Captain, Jalen said through gritted teeth, his voice taut with stress. We can't keep this up. We need reinforcements. Myra's heart sank. The Ghost Star had been humanity's last hope, the last ship in a dying fleet. There were no reinforcements. No one was coming. And yet they kept fighting. Myra's gaze hardened. Her crew, her ship, her people, they deserved more than this. The thought of giving up, of letting the Valor's win, was unbearable. She glanced back at the viewscreen, her eyes narrowing. The Valor's fleet was still pushing forward, undeterred, unrelenting. But there was something else she saw now, a flicker of uncertainty in their movements, a crack in their confidence. Mira wasn't going to let them see it. Not yet. Give it everything we've got, she ordered, her voice low but full of fire. This fight isn't over. As the Ghost Star surged forward, the ship's engines screaming in protest, Mira felt the spark within her grow brighter, stronger. The battle was far from over. The Valor's had underestimated them, and they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The Ghost Star was gasping for breath, its engines groaning under the relentless assault of the Valor's. Mira sat rigid in her chair, her eyes locked on the view screen, every nerve in her body screaming for a solution, some way to turn the tide. But nothing was working. The pulse cannon had bought them a moment, a fleeting glimmer of hope, but it hadn't been enough. Every sensor, every tactical readout, told the same story: they were outmatched. The drones that had once been their pride were nothing more than floating debris. The hull was riddled with breaches, sparks flying from exposed circuits. And the Valor's were closing in, like sharks circling their prey. Captain, we're losing power, Marlowe said, her voice tense, barely above a whisper. The energy reserves are drained. If we don't find a way to stop this now. Myra's jaw clenched. She didn't need to hear the rest of the sentence. If they didn't turn things around, they wouldn't survive this fight. It was as simple as that. We're not giving up, she said, her voice cutting through the static in the air. Keep trying to reroute power to the shields. We need those drones back online. We're out of time, Captain, Jalen said from the weapons console. The Valaks are preparing to launch another round of disruptor beams. If we don't take them out now, we're finished. Myra's gaze shifted to the tactical display. The enemy fleet was preparing to make its final push. It was clear now, this wasn't a simple battle. It was a war of attrition. And humanity's only hope for survival was about to be extinguished. But then, as if by instinct, Myra's fingers brushed over the control panel, a faint memory of something she had seen in the ship's schematics flashing through her mind. The Ghost Star had a backup system, one that had never been fully tested. It was risky, reckless even, but it might be their only chance. Jalen, Myra said, her voice low but firm. Can we tap into the secondary reactor? I need full power to the engines. Jalen blinked at her, confused. Captain, that reactor isn't designed for combat. It's only a backup. It could destabilize the entire ship. I don't care, Myra shot back. We don't have a choice. The ship shuddered as the Valaks fired their weapons again, but Myra kept her focus, her mind honed on the only option left. Jalen hesitated for only a heartbeat before nodding. Understood. I'll reroute the energy. Just don't make me regret this. As the countdown began on Jalen's console, Myra watched the readout on her screen. Power surged through the Ghost Star, the backup reactor coming online with a violent, shuddering jolt. The lights flickered once before stabilizing, a faint hum now echoing through the walls. She could feel the power beneath her fingertips, a raw, untamed force. Shields at 30%, Marlowe reported. But we've got a shot at keeping them up for the next few minutes. Power's holding steady. Myra took a breath. It wasn't enough. They weren't out of the woods yet. They had only a few moments before the Valaks would rip them apart. Prepare to fire the remaining drones, Myra ordered, her eyes narrowing. This is it. If we can't push them back with everything we've got, we won't survive this. The crew moved quickly, but Myra knew the weight of her command had never been more pressing. Each decision felt like it could be their last. She clenched her fists in her lap, her mind racing as the battle unfolded in front of her. The Ghost Star fired its remaining drones in a desperate flurry of motion, the small ships weaving through space with pinpoint accuracy. Each one locked onto a Valak's vessel, its weapons lighting up as they made contact. But Myra's heart sank as she saw a few drones go dark, torn apart by the overwhelming firepower of the Valak's ships. No! Myra spat under her breath. Damn it! Her fingers tightened around the armrests, her nails digging into the metal. She couldn't let this be the end. Not like this. They had come too far. But as she glanced at the screen again, something caught her eye. A faint distortion in the Valak's flagship's shields, something subtle but unmistakable. A weakness. It was a long shot. Too risky. But there was no other choice. Marlowe, Myra called, her voice hard and commanding. Get me a direct link to the flagship's communications. We're going to force a surrender. Marlowe's eyes widened. Captain, you can't be serious. After everything we've been through. Do it! Myra snapped. Marlowe hesitated, then quickly worked her console, establishing a line of communication to the Valak's flagship. The seconds stretched on, each one a lifetime, but finally, the connection was made. Myra's gaze locked onto the screen as the face of the Valak's commander appeared, his alien features cold and unyielding. His voice, calm and calculated, filtered through the speakers. Human captain, he said, his tone dripping with disdain. You are out of time. Surrender now, and we may spare what is left of your fleet. Your resistance has been amusing, but it is over. Myra felt the heat of the battle in her chest. The loss of drones, the devastation to her ship, it was all too much to bear. But she didn't back down. You think you've won, don't you? She said, her voice low and steady. You think humanity is just going to lie down and die? We've fought against worse than you, and we're still here. The Valak's commander's lips curled in what could have been a smile, though it held no warmth. You misunderstand. You are not fighting us. You are fighting your own inevitable extinction. Myra's eyes narrowed. If we're going to die, it will be fighting, not surrendering. She cut the connection, slamming her hand down on the control panel. Jalen, she said, her voice fierce. Fire everything we have left. Now. The final volley of weapons erupted from the Ghost Star, each shot a desperate prayer. The Valak's flagship staggered, its shields flickering violently before collapsing under the barrage. But the fight wasn't over yet. The remaining Valak ships adjusted their course, preparing to retaliate. But Mira wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Keep firing, she commanded, her heart pounding in her chest. We fight until the very last breath. The ship lurched again, and Myra's knuckles turned white as she held on. She was holding on to more than just the ship now. She was holding on to hope. And hope, no matter how small, could be the spark that lit the way through the darkest of times. This fight wasn't over. Not yet. The Ghost Star was barely holding together. The walls hummed, every tremor in the ship sending jolts through the crew. Myra's hands gripped the console, her knuckles white, eyes fixed on the view screen. The Valak's flagship was reeling, smoke curling from its wounded form, but its remaining fleet, still formidable, was closing in. This was it. One final push. One last stand. Shields are down to 5%, Marlowe reported, her voice barely audible over the constant rattle of gunfire. We can't take much more. Captain, we need to. I know. Mira cut her off, her voice steady, but her thoughts were racing. We hold, Marlowe. Just hold for a little longer. Marlowe didn't reply, her face a mask of concentration as she continued working the controls. Mira felt the weight of every decision pressed down on her. This battle wasn't about winning anymore, it was about surviving long enough to strike a blow that would change everything. The Valaks didn't understand what they were up against. But they would soon find out. Mira leaned forward in her chair, watching as the remaining drones, only a handful left, swarmed around the enemy ships, weaving in and out of their fire. The battle had moved from a well-orchestrated defense to a chaotic dance of survival. But the drones, the true heart of the Ghost Star, were performing beyond expectation. They had been designed for moments like this, to adapt, to overcome. Ensign Jalen, Mira said, her voice low but firm. Initiate the secondary cannon system. Now. Jalen's eyes widened as he glanced at her. Captain, that system. Do it, she said, cutting him off. We have no other choice. Jalen hesitated for a split second, then his fingers flew across the console, activating the secondary weapons system. Mira could feel the hum of energy building, the very ship itself vibrating with power. The countdown began. If this worked, it would rip through the Valak's fleet, but it would also come at a cost. She wasn't sure if the Ghost Star would survive the blast. But that was a risk she had to take. Pulse is at critical, Jalen reported, his voice tense. Captain, this is going to be a massive energy drain. If it doesn't work. It'll work, Mira interrupted. She leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. It has to. Outside the ship, the Valak's fleet continued its relentless assault. But Mira could see something now, an opening. A weakness in their formation, a gap between two of their largest ships. A gap wide enough for the Ghost Star to strike. Her mind flashed to the many battles she had led, the countless simulations she had run. The one thing she had learned from all of them was this: the enemy always left a crack, always underestimated the human capacity for resilience, for creativity in the face of defeat. It was that resilience that had gotten her this far. That resilience that would carry them through the storm. The countdown reached 0. Firing, Jalen said, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. The secondary cannon unleashed its power. A concentrated beam of raw energy shot out from the Ghost Star's core, a brilliant streak of light cutting through the darkness of space. The blast tore into the Valak's fleet, hitting the two massive ships in the center of their formation. Explosions rocked the area, the shockwave rattling the Ghost Star to its core. For a moment, everything was still. Then the screams of the dying Valak's ships filled the air. The flagship's hull buckled, its shields collapsing entirely under the strain. One of the larger Valak's ships split in two, debris scattering in every direction. The shockwaves sent ripples through the remaining fleet, throwing off their coordination. Mira watched, breathless, as their carefully constructed formation shattered like glass. "Captain?" Marlowe shouted. "We've breached their formation. They're scattering. They're retreating." Mira didn't move, her eyes glued to the screen. The Valak's fleet, once so confident in their superiority, was now in disarray. But it wasn't over yet. Not until they saw the last ship fall. She leaned forward again, her mind working furiously. The victory was theirs, but the battle wasn't done. "All hands prepare for final assault," Mira ordered. "Push them back. Now." The crew responded immediately, their focus sharper than ever. The Ghost Star, its power dwindling but still intact, moved forward with all the speed it could muster. The drones, now fewer in number, were still striking at the Valak's remnants, disorienting their enemy. Mira could see their shields flickering, their movements becoming desperate. But they were not broken yet. "Captain, the last of their fleet is regrouping near the edge of the system," Marlowe reported. "We can finish this, if we push harder." Myra's eyes were still fixed on the view screen. The remaining Valak ships were battered, retreating but not defeated. They were regrouping, preparing for one final strike. It was clear now that they would fight until the very end, no matter the cost. But Mira wasn't about to let them get away. She couldn't. "All drones, engage," she ordered. "Take them down. This ends now." The Ghost Star surged forward, her last remaining drones charging into the fray. Mira watched, the pit of her stomach tightening, as the final battle unfolded before her. Her heart pounded in her chest as the drones collided with the retreating Valak ships, detonations lighting up the void. Seconds turned into minutes, and slowly, the last of the Valak's fleet crumbled. One by one, the enemy ships fell, unable to withstand the relentless onslaught. The Valak's flagship, now a charred hulk, drifted lifelessly in space, its once mighty form reduced to a floating ruin. Mira leaned back in her chair, exhaustion settling into her bones. The silence in the bridge was deafening. The battle was over. The Ghost Star had survived. And humanity had won. "Is it over?" Marlowe asked, her voice quiet. Mira took a deep breath. "It is. We did it." But the victory felt hollow. The cost had been high, too high. They had lost so many drones, so many people. And yet, in the back of her mind, a small, flickering thought whispered that this was only the beginning. The Valaks were beaten, but there were others out there, watching. Others who would come. Mira turned to face her crew, her voice steady. "Prepare the ship for return. We'll need every resource to rebuild." As the crew went to work, Mira stared out at the wreckage of the battlefield. The stars ahead were still, endless and quiet. She could feel the weight of what had happened, but she also knew one undeniable truth. Humanity had fought, and humanity had survived. And that, she thought, was enough. For now.